There comes a moment, not loud, not dramatic, when something deep inside you whispers, this isn't it. Not the life you dreamed of. Not the self you hope to become. It happens on a quiet drive, in a crowded room, or alone in the dark while the ceiling stares back. You realize you've been living from the outside in, and your spirit is suffocating, because alignment isn't about image. It's about integration. It's not about doing what looks right. It's about becoming what feels true. And if your life is built on what's expected rather than what's essential, then it will always collapse under the weight of your soul. You can't fake peace. You can't decorate emptiness. You can't outrun the ache that says, this version of me is a betrayal of the real one. But here's the truth. Most people avoid until it breaks them. Your spirit isn't subtle forever. It lets you tolerate misalignment for a while, for survival, for approval, for fear. But eventually, it revolts through restlessness, through anxiety, through depression that can't be explained by circumstance. That's your soul going on strike. That's your deeper self refusing to cooperate with the performance. And that's the beginning, not the end. Because breakdown is not failure. It is a signal, a sacred announcement. It's time to rebuild, but not the old way, not with borrowed values, not with second-hand dreams, not with a blueprint they gave you just because they were afraid to follow their own. No, this time you rebuild from the inside out. This time you learn the art of listening to yourself again, like you did when you were 5, and didn't care what was practical, only what was real. This time, you don't chase the life that photographs well. You chase the life that feels like home in your chest. This is the rebirth, not the polished Instagram kind, the real kind, where your life falls apart because it was never really yours to begin with. And from the rubble, you don't ask, how do I fix this? You ask, what wants to be born through me now? That's the question that changes everything, because the answer will not come from your ego. It will come from your instinct. It will not arrive with applause. It will arrive in silence, in that quiet knowing that you cannot unhear once it speaks. But don't expect ease. Rebuilding a life that aligns with your spirit is not convenient. It will cost you your certainty. It will cost you your pleasing persona. It may even cost you your circle, your status, and your schedule. But what you gain is yourself. And once you taste that, you never go back. You start asking different questions. Not, what do I have to do? But, what do I want to become? Not, what makes sense? But, what feels sacred? Not, how do I survive? But, how do I live fully, even if it terrifies me? Because the opposite of alignment isn't chaos. It's numbness. And most people are sleepwalking through beautifully curated prisons, pretending they're free. But you're waking up. That's why it hurts. That's why the life you've built feels like a costume. That's why success started to feel hollow the moment you arrived. It's not because you failed. It's because you outgrew it. It's because your spirit got stronger than your script. And now you're standing at the crossroads. On one side, comfort. On the other, congruence. One will keep you liked. The other will keep you alive. You know which one your soul is choosing. It always has. The question is whether you will follow. So, where do you begin? Not by burning everything down, but by telling the truth to yourself. Where are you pretending? Where are you shrinking? Where are you performing, perfecting, pleasing, when what you really crave is permission to just be real? Start there, not with strategy, with sincerity. Because rebuilding your life isn't a productivity project. It's a process of remembering, of recovering the parts of you that had to hide, of relearning the voice of your own knowing after years of outsourcing your decisions to fear. This is not about reinvention. This is about resurrection. This is the return of your unapologetic wholeness. And it doesn't happen in one breakthrough moment. It happens in choices so small, they look like nothing from the outside. Saying no when you always used to say yes. Taking the walk without your phone. Telling the truth when a lie would have been easier. Letting silence speak when everyone else is shouting. It's subtle, but it's seismic. Because you're not just changing your habits. You're changing your home, the inner one. You're building a life that doesn't require you to abandon yourself to be accepted. And that's rare. Most people are at war with themselves, craving freedom while clinging to their false identity. But you're not here for that anymore. You're here to live a life that matches your soul. And yes, it will be misunderstood. People will say, you've changed. Let them. You are not responsible for their version of you. You are responsible for your alignment. Because when your inner life and outer life match, you don't need validation. You radiate something deeper, integrity. And integrity isn't about being perfect. It's about being real. It's about walking into rooms without a mask because you no longer fear who you are. That's the power of alignment. You don't have to scream for attention. Your presence speaks. You don't have to manipulate your image. Your energy tells the truth. And you know you're on the right path, not because it gets easier, but because you get lighter. Not because everyone approves, but because you stop needing them to. And the more you align, the more life aligns with you. Opportunities that once felt forced now flow. People who once drained you fall away. And what's left is something sacred. A life that doesn't just look good, but feels like peace. Because at the end of the day, what we call life purpose isn't something you chase. It's something you uncover. It's not a goal, it's a resonance. And once you find it, nothing else satisfies. You will never again be able to betray your soul for applause. Because once you've tasted truth, comfort feels like a cage. And freedom, it's terrifying at first. Because it demands responsibility. But eventually, it becomes your rhythm. You breathe deeper. You speak slower. You listen more. And the noise that used to rule you, it loses its power. You stop chasing the next thing. Because the next thing is no longer where your worth lives. It lives here, in this moment, in this breath, in this body that you finally come home to. Continue. And when you finally come home to yourself, you realize you were never really lost. You were just buried. Under shoulds, under guilt, under the roles they taught you to play before you even had the words to say no. But now, you see it. The life you thought you had to hold together, it wasn't yours. It was a cage made of gold, shiny enough to impress, tight enough to choke. And so, the rebuild begins. Not with noise, but with silence. Not with answers, but with a sacred curiosity that says, what would my life look like if I stopped betraying myself to belong? And slowly, brick by brick, breath by breath, you start to dismantle everything that was built on fear. And in its place, you begin to build something holy. Not because it follows tradition, but because it follows truth. You build a rhythm that honors your energy. You build boundaries that don't need explanation. You build mornings that begin with presence, not panic. You build relationships that see you, not just use you. And above all, you build a relationship with yourself so deep that even if the world turns its back, you never again turn your back on your own spirit. That is the power of alignment. Because alignment isn't an achievement. It's a homecoming. It's the courage to look at your life and ask, what parts of this were chosen by fear pretending to be wisdom? What pieces of this identity were stitched together by survival, not sincerity? And what would it feel like to finally be whole instead of impressive? This is not rebellion. This is remembrance. This is you finally remembering what you were before the world told you who to be. And from that remembrance, you begin to walk differently. Not faster, but deeper. Not louder, but with gravity. Because you're no longer chasing your becoming. You stop searching for a path. You are the path. Your life becomes the canvas. Your decisions become brushstrokes. Your spirit becomes the hand guiding it all. And yes, there will still be pain, but the pain of alignment is holy. It purifies. It burns away the false. It makes space for the sacred. And yes, there will be uncertainty, but the uncertainty of the soul is fertile ground, because when nothing is certain, everything is possible. And you no longer fear the unknown because you finally know yourself. So you stop asking the world for direction. And you start listening to your own gravity, that invisible pull towards something deeper, that sacred hum that only you can hear. It's been there the whole time. In the books you were drawn to, in the places your heart softened, in the questions that wouldn't leave you alone. And now you understand. Your spirit was never silent. You just got too busy to hear it, but not anymore. Now you know how to listen. And with each step, you trust. Even when it doesn't make sense. Even when no one else sees it. Even when the old version of you screams to go back. You trust because you remember what it cost to live out of alignment. The fatigue that no rest could fix. The anxiety that no success could soothe. The quiet ache of knowing you were surviving, but not living. And now that you know the difference, you refuse to return. Not because you hate who you were, but because you love who you're becoming too much to go back. This is the quiet revolution. Not loud, not branded, not built for likes, but built for life. A life that breathes with you. A life that reflects you. A life that remembers you. And when the world tries to pull you out of alignment, because it will, you pause. You breathe. You ask the only question that matters. Does this honor my spirit? And if the answer is no, then the answer is no. Because you no longer negotiate with your soul. You no longer compromise for crumbs. You no longer dress your truth in costumes to make it digestible. You let it stand, unapologetically, unedited, unmasked, because you know now your alignment is your revolution. Your authenticity is your offering. And your presence, your real presence, is a permission slip for others to rise. Not perform, not conform, but rise. Rise into themselves. Rise into truth. Rise into lives that don't just work on paper, but sing in the marrow of their bones. This is how the world changes. Not through force, but through the quiet courage of one person deciding to live from the inside out. That person is you. And this moment right now is not small. It is sacred. Because you are not just rebuilding a life. You are remembering a self. You are reclaiming a soul. You are rewriting a story that begins and ends in truth. No more masks. No more performances. No more betrayal, dressed as ambition. Only this, a life that feels like freedom. And no, not everyone will understand. But the ones who are meant for you, the ones who are also waking up They will feel you like a signal in the dark, not because you convinced them, but because you became yourself so fully, they recognized their own reflection in your liberation. That's the work, not to impress, but to embody, to live so aligned that your life becomes medicine for others. Not through preaching, but through presence, because when you rebuild from spirit, you don't need to push, you pull. Not with force, but with frequency. And that frequency is not about being loud. It's about being true. And truth doesn't beg. It doesn't sell. It doesn't explain. It just is. And when you become it, you never have to chase another thing again. Because when you become the truth, you become unshakable. The storms still come. The doubts still whisper. The world still tries to distract you with noise, with urgency, with illusion. But your center, your still, sovereign, sacred center, does not move because it no longer depends on validation. It no longer collapses under rejection. It no longer bends for applause. It remembers who you are beyond all the layers, beyond the labels, beyond the lies. And in that remembering, you become dangerous, not to others, but to everything that kept you small. Because aligned people are not easy to manipulate. They don't chase what they don't need. They don't over-explain their worth. They walk with a knowing that cannot be purchased or performed, only earned through inner fire. And you've walked through that fire. You let it burn away the falsehoods. You watched identities melt, attachments crumble, personas collapse. And what remained wasn't emptiness. It was essence. That rare, undeniable essence that says, I no longer need to be anything other than what I am. That is a rebuild. Not adding more, but stripping down to the real. Not becoming better, but becoming whole. And when you live from that wholeness, you stop trying to control everything, because your power is no longer in outcomes. It's in alignment. You don't need to force the doors open. You become the invitation, the job, the love, the peace, the meaning. They don't arrive because you manipulate them. They arrive because you finally match them. Because the life you want is not found in effort alone. It's found in energetic honesty. It's found in becoming the kind of person who naturally attracts what your old self would have had to chase endlessly. And yes, there will still be moments when the old patterns call you back. Back to proving, back to pleasing, back to playing small, just to feel safe. But now, you catch it. You feel the dissonance in your chest. You hear the silence beneath the noise. You know, and that knowing becomes your compass. It's subtle, but unshakable. It says, no, not this, not anymore. We don't betray ourselves like that now. And the beauty of rebuilding from spirit is that it's not about having all the answers. It's about refusing to live a lie, even when the truth is inconvenient, even when it costs you comfort, even when it stretches you past everything you thought you were capable of. Because that stretch, that sacred discomfort, is where you grow into your real life. Not the predictable one, not the perfect one, the true one, the one that breathes with you, not against you, the one that doesn't demand performance but welcomes presence, the one that doesn't require you to wear masks just to be loved, because you've stopped mistaking acceptance for belonging. You've stopped calling silence peace. You've stopped worshipping the life that only looked good to those who never asked how it felt. And now you are rebuilding a life that doesn't just exist, it resonates. It pulses with purpose. It hums with harmony. It matches your frequency. And with every step deeper into yourself, you realize the most radical act is not to change the world, but to stop letting the world change you. To stop adapting to environments that demand your suppression. To stop shrinking for comfort. To stop twisting your truth to fit someone else's mold. You weren't made to fit. You were made to free. Free others by freeing yourself. Free the next generation by showing them that authenticity is not a risk. It's a return. And when you live that way, when you become the embodiment of your spirit's call, you don't just inspire people. You activate them. You remind them of what they forgot. You bring them home to themselves simply by refusing to leave home within your own soul. This is the ripple effect of alignment. It cannot be faked. It cannot be taught. It can only be lived. So live it. Let your days be rituals of remembrance. Let your words be arrows of truth. Let your actions be reflections of your values, not your fears. Let your life be your loudest prayer. Not to be accepted, but to be aligned. Because the moment you stop performing, the moment you start living from that holy center within, you become untouchable in the best way. They can misunderstand you, and you'll still feel peace. They can doubt you, and you'll still walk forward. They can leave, and you'll still be whole. Because you didn't come here to be understood by everyone. You came here to be true to yourself. And the cost of that is high. But the reward is freedom. Real, unshakable, breath in your lungs freedom. The kind that doesn't ask for permission. The kind that doesn't come and go with circumstance. The kind that is yours because you finally stopped renting your identity from the world. And in that final letting go, you don't just rebuild your life, you rebirth your soul. Welcome home. And when you finally come home, you understand why nothing else ever satisfied you. You see it now, why the titles felt hollow, why the relationships that looked perfect still felt lonely, why success without soul tasted like dust in your mouth. You were never hungry for more. You were hungry for you, the real you, the one beneath the armor, the one they told you to tone down, cover up, rearrange, refine. But now you stop apologizing for your depth. You stop negotiating with your intuition. You stop asking for permission to be whole, because the world does not need more perfectly packaged people. It needs more people who are alive. People who bleed truth when they speak. People who feel more than they hide. People who don't just survive the day, they bring soul to it. And that's you now. Not a replica. Not a role. A living, breathing reclamation of spirit in human form. You no longer care for the masks. They itch. They suffocate. They blur your vision. You want clarity now. Clarity that cuts through expectations. Clarity that makes it impossible to go back to sleep. And as you walk deeper into this clarity, you begin to notice something sacred. You become less reactive. Not because you're numb, but because you're rooted. You're not threatened by opinions anymore. You don't chase being understood. You know who you are. And that knowing, that grounded gut level certainty isn't loud. It's still like a mountain, still like ancient truth, still like someone who has met every part of themselves and decided to love them all. Even the broken pieces, even the scared parts, even the shadows they once tried to exile. Because rebuilding a life in alignment with your spirit doesn't mean erasing your pain. It means honoring it, welcoming it home, letting it speak so It doesn't have to scream. You don't push it down. You integrate it. You let it become your teacher instead of your jailer. And in doing so, you become whole. Not perfect, but complete. Because wholeness was never about being flawless. It was about being real, being honest, being unarmored, unfiltered, unafraid. And from that wholeness, you begin to create, not to impress, but to express. You write what scares you. You speak what others avoid. You love in ways that feel like truth, not transaction. And what once felt like risk now feels like oxygen. Because now you're breathing from your own lungs, not recycled air from someone else's dream, not borrowed scripts from someone else's fears. Your breath, your life, your sacred path. And it doesn't matter anymore if they approve, because your alignment is not a democracy. Your spirit is not up for debate. You don't need to explain your joy. You don't need to justify your peace. You simply live it. And in living it, you give others silent permission to do the same. Not through slogans, not through self-help cliches, through being, through presence, through embodied truth. This is how revolutions begin. Not always with noise, but with a single person deciding to live aligned, no matter the cost. And yes, there is cost. You may lose comfort. You may lose convenience. You may lose people who only love the mask. But what you gain is everything. You gain clarity that burns through confusion. You gain peace that outlives chaos. You gain power that doesn't scream, but radiates. And that power is not control. It's congruence. It's the unshakable calm that comes from knowing you are no longer living someone else's story. You've claimed your own. You've written your name in the ink of integrity. You've stood face to face with your fears and said, I am not afraid of losing what was never meant for me. That's not arrogance. That's evolution, because alignment with your spirit is not just a new direction. It's a new dimension. One where your values lead. One where your heart is no longer a liability, but a compass. One where every day feels like a conversation between your soul and your choices. And over time, that conversation gets clearer. You begin to hear what is yours and what isn't. What's true and what's noise. What aligns and what betrays. You move slower now, but with more intention. You choose less, but every choice echoes with meaning. You don't need to do more to feel worthy. You don't need to chase to feel alive. You are alive because you finally stop running from yourself. And this quiet, rooted, radiant existence, this is what your soul was starving for. Not applause, not performance, presence, not perfection, not productivity, peace, not control, not clarity, but congruence. And now that you found it, you don't need to convince anyone of anything. Your life will speak for itself. It will say, here is someone who remembered. Here is someone who returned. Here is someone who rebuilt not from pressure, but from presence. And in doing so, they became a living invitation for others to rise. No drama, no performance, just the undeniable resonance of a spirit fully embodied in a human life. And from here, the real life begins. Because when the real life begins, not the scripted one, not the survival one, not the one engineered to impress, but the soul-built one, you start to notice how different everything feels. Food tastes richer. Silence becomes symphonic. Even the ordinary moments, walking, breathing, listening to the wind, begin to feel like sacred rituals. Not because the world changed, but because you did. Your nervous system no longer fires in fear just because you're still. Your mind no longer spirals trying to prove it belongs. Your heart no longer asks for permission to beat as it was meant to. You've untangled yourself from the machinery of expectations. You've stepped outside the algorithm of approval. You are no longer optimizing for appearance. You are honoring essence. And this essence, this radiant, raw, unfiltered aliveness becomes your default. It's not a performance. It's not a peak state. It's a home. One that moves with you, breathes with you, shelters you from within. And when you wake up every day from that place of inner safety, your entire relationship with time transforms. You no longer chase minutes. You meet them. You're not running towards some distant finish line. You're walking in deep presence with each step, rooted in the knowing that what you build now is no longer a monument to fear, but an altar to truth. This shift, this sacred pivot, it's not loud, but it is irreversible. You look back on who you were, the version of you that bent to fit, that shrank to belong, that wore smiles as shields, and you don't judge them. You thank them because they kept you alive. They got you here, but they are no longer needed. You have outgrown the scaffolding. You have outloved the mask. You have outlived the lie. And now, each action you take, whether it's the way you speak to a stranger, the way you pause before saying yes, the way you choose rest without guilt, becomes a form of self-reverence, a ritual of alignment. And alignment becomes your foundation, not motivation, not hustle, not fear dressed up as ambition. Alignment, that unshakable sense that you are no longer betraying yourself for any result. And when you live from alignment, you start to hear your soul clearly. It doesn't shout. It doesn't command. It simply resonates. It says, this, not that. It says, here, not there. It says, now, not later. And it never argues. It just waits patiently until you're quiet enough to listen. And now you are. Now you are not just listening, you're living it. You walk into rooms not trying to be the most interesting person, but the most interested. Not trying to impress, but to express something honest. You let go of image. You lean into intimacy. You're not afraid to be seen anymore because there's no longer anything to protect. You are not a brand. You are not a product. You are a presence. And your presence heals because it's real. This is what happens when your life aligns with your spirit. You stop chasing energy. You become it. You stop seeking miracles. You embody them. You stop hiding your depth to fit into shallow places. You honor your own ocean. You don't overextend to prove your worth. You rest in it. Because now you know you don't need to be louder to be heard. You don't need to be everywhere to be seen. You don't need to be everything to be loved. You just need to be fully yourself. And that is the rarest frequency in the world. Not curated, not calculated, but whole, honest, alive, and the ones meant for you, those also shedding old skins, those tired of the performance, those yearning for something deeper, they will feel you. Not because you speak louder, but because your silence says more than most people's shouting ever could. And they'll come, not to consume, but to connect, because your life, your spirit-aligned life, will have become a mirror, not for ego, but for essence. And when two people meet in their essence, nothing superficial can survive. That's when real relationships are born. That's when real art is created. That's when real purpose ignites. Not from striving, but from surrender. Because when you rebuild your life from spirit, you are no longer building for the world's expectations. You're building for eternity. You're building something that outlasts trends, something that can't be cancelled or commodified, something that will whisper through time long after your name is forgotten. A soul once lived here, a soul that dared to be whole. And maybe that's the real goal. Not legacy, not fame, but truth. To live in such a way that your very existence becomes a quiet revolution. One that says, I remembered, I returned, I rebuilt, and I didn't abandon myself in the process. And when you reach that place, not the summit, not the finish line, but the state of being, where your breath no longer resists your body, where your spirit no longer negotiates with your mind, where your life no longer feels like something to manage, but something to meet, you realize this is it. Not the destination, but the alignment that lets every step be the destination. You stop postponing joy. You stop waiting for arrival. You stop treating your life like a problem to be solved and start honoring it as a miracle to be lived. And with that shift, even the small things shimmer. The quiet cup of coffee, the glance out the window, the moment when your hand rests on your heart and it actually responds. That's not small. That's you becoming visible to yourself again. You no longer run on autopilot. You feel your days now. You don't numb the hours waiting for them to pass. You meet them, greet them, enter them like sacred rooms where your presence is a prayer. And yes, there will still be resistance. There will still be shadows. You're human. This path isn't sterile. It's sacredly messy. But now, you don't run from the mess. You walk into it because alignment has given you the courage to face all of it. Not just the light, but the fire. Not just the peace, but the process. You understand now that rebuilding a life that aligns with your spirit isn't a project. It's a devotion, a daily practice of returning to the core. A moment-by-moment conversation between your breath and your becoming. And in that conversation, you stop outsourcing truth. You stop borrowing opinions. You stop reaching for systems that were never made with your soul in mind. You create your own rhythm, one that honors your energy, one that listens when you whisper, not today, instead of demanding performance. One that celebrates your slowness as wisdom, not weakness. Because now you know you don't need to be fast to be powerful. You don't need to be busy to be worthy. You don't need to be seen to be real. You just need to be aligned, fully, deeply, without apology. And when you live from that place long enough, a strange kind of miracle unfolds. You begin to trust life again. Not blindly, but bravely. You trust that what leaves is making space. You trust that what hurts is teaching you. You trust that what calls you forward isn't random. It's remembered, because alignment awakens the intelligence of the soul. It clears the static. It tunes you back into the frequency that was always meant to guide you. Not the world's voice, but your own. And that voice is quiet, but fierce, gentle, but uncompromising. It does not scream. It rings, and when it rings, you listen. Not because you fear what will happen if you don't, but because you finally love yourself enough to obey. That's the breakthrough. Not some external success, not some shiny mountaintop, but this, choosing not to abandon yourself, even when it's inconvenient, even when it costs you something, even when it makes you the only one in the room walking the other way. And when that becomes your normal, when integrity is no longer optional, when honesty feels like oxygen, when peace matters more than praise, you will look around at the world and see how many are still trapped in cages they've learned to decorate. You will feel the pull to shake them awake, to break the bars, to light the match. But instead, you will just live your freedom fully, quietly, radiantly. Because the most powerful transmission you will ever give to another soul is this. Here is someone who remembered who they are and did not flinch. Here is someone who turned their pain into wisdom and their wisdom into way. Here is someone who stopped apologizing for their truth and became it. And if that's all you ever do, it's enough. Not because you changed the world, but because you stopped letting the world change you. And in doing so, you became the kind of person the world quietly reorients itself around. Not with noise, not with force, but with the unwavering gravity of a life lived in alignment with the spirit. And that gravity, it pulls others home, it draws them inward, it whispers to their bones, you're allowed to live this way too. You're allowed to stop performing. You're allowed to start feeling. You're allowed to rebuild. And they will, because you did. Not by shouting, not by striving, but by becoming the evidence that a life of deep truth, deep beauty, and deep presence is still possible in a world that forgot. And that is how a single silent soul can become a revolution. And when your very existence becomes a revolution, you stop needing to prove it. You stop pointing to resumes, achievements, followers, trophies. You point to your peace. You point to your presence. You point to the calm that cannot be faked, to the steady eyes, the unclenched jaw, the heart that no longer races to meet deadlines that were never yours to begin with. Because when you rebuild a life aligned with your spirit, you no longer measure your days by how much you got done. You measure them by how deeply you felt, how honestly you spoke, how gently you treated your own becoming. And while the world races, you remember that urgency is often the voice of fear, that rushing is sometimes a form of avoidance, that real progress doesn't scream, it settles, it roots, it anchors, and that's you now, rooted, not rigid, not frozen, but rooted like a tree that finally trusts the ground it stands on. You don't get shaken by every gust. You don't get pulled by every trend. You are no longer tossed between 1,000 versions of yourself because you've finally chosen one, the true one. And in choosing it, you realize how much energy you once spent pretending, how much time was burned keeping masks in place, how many opportunities you said yes to just to avoid the awkwardness of your own boundaries. But no more. Because now you see peace is expensive. And every time you say yes when your soul says no, you are paying for it with your life. So now you protect your peace, not with walls, but with clarity, not with armor, but with honesty. You stop explaining your no's. You stop softening your truth to cushion someone else's comfort. You stop editing your presence just to fit into a room that was never built for your spirit. Because now Your self-respect is louder than your need to be liked. Now, your integrity speaks louder than your insecurity ever did. Now, your alignment shines so brightly that it becomes impossible to abandon yourself ever again. And this doesn't make you perfect. It makes you real. It makes you clean. Clean in the way rivers are clean. Clean in the way tears are clean. Clean in the way truth feels when it's no longer fighting through filters. You stop layering noise on top of your knowing. You start giving your intuition the final word. You let your silence speak when your words would only dilute the message. Because not everything deserves your energy. Not everything requires your response. Not everything that comes knocking is worthy of entry. You don't shut the door with bitterness. You close it with peace. You walk away, not with fire, but with the calm of someone who finally understands, I don't owe access to anyone who cannot hold space for my truth. And that understanding, it sets you free. You start walking into your own life without flinching. You stop rehearsing who to be. You stop bracing for rejection. You enter rooms as you are, not as who they expect. And whoever stays, stays. Whoever leaves, leaves. And through it all, you remain. Steady, hold, unmoved. Because when your spirit leads, you no longer need to be chosen. You choose yourself. You no longer need to be saved. You save your own soul every single day by not betraying it for the sake of peace that never really was. And slowly, the world around you shifts. Not because you're forcing it, but because you become a mirror, a quiet reminder of what they forgot. That they too have a center. That they too can return. That they too can lay down the burden of the performance and pick up the sacredness of presence. This is the quiet power of alignment. It ripples, it echoes, it awakens, not with fireworks, but with a soft, undeniable gravity of truth, of wholeness, of spirit made visible. And if there is any purpose to all the pain, to the unraveling, to the dark nights, to the rebuilding, it is this: to become clear enough that your life no longer dilutes your soul, to become honest enough that your choices become prayers, to become present enough that your very being becomes proof. You don't have to leave yourself to succeed. You don't have to betray yourself to belong. You don't have to abandon your depth to be loved. Because when you align, truly, deeply align, everything that is not meant for you begins to fall away. And everything that begins to recognize you, not just in theory, in feeling, in form, in flow. You don't have to chase anymore. You don't have to explain anymore. You don't have to shrink anymore. You just have to stay true, stay rooted, stay present, stay you, and let that truth, that unshakable, radiant, fully embodied truth, do what it was always meant to do: set you free. Because once you taste that kind of freedom, not the loud kind, not the glamorous kind, but the quiet, soul-fed kind that wraps around your bones like peace, you will never again confuse safety with silence. You will never again trade your essence for acceptance. You will never again dim your own knowing just to stay within the lines someone else drew for you. You've lived that way before, and it drained you. It made your smile feel like a disguise. It made your accomplishments feel like burdens. It made your mornings feel like negotiations. But now, every breath carries a different weight. It's lighter, but it's deeper, because it's yours. You've stopped living a rented life. You've reclaimed the deed to your own existence. And you see things now, subtleties you never noticed when you were distracted by approval. You notice when your body whispers no, even while your mouth prepares to say yes. You notice the difference between effort and force. You notice when a room feels like home and when it feels like a test. This noticing, this gentle awareness becomes the compass. You don't need a 5-year plan anymore. You don't need a script. You need presence. And the more you practice presence, the more clearly you hear the only voice that ever mattered. Your own, not the voice that was trained to perform, not the voice that was shaped by fear, but the one that existed long before you knew how to spell your own name. The one that knew what mattered before you were taught what should. And when that voice takes the lead, you stop rushing because you finally trust the pace of your own path. You understand that what's aligned cannot be missed, and what's misaligned will never last. So you let go. You let go of the people who loved the mask. You let go of the dreams that were planted in your heart by other people's fears. You let go of the calendar full of obligations that never fed your soul. And in that letting go, you create space for returning, not to who you were, but to who you always were underneath it all. The child who created for the joy of it. The soul who wanted truth more than praise. The being who never needed to find purpose, because living fully was the purpose all along. And from that place, you rebuild not just your life, but your language. You stop calling burnout normal. You stop calling pretending professional. You stop calling self-betrayal humility. And you speak differently now, with care, with pause, with power that doesn't shout but resonates. Because when you are aligned with your spirit, even your silence speaks with integrity. You're no longer reactive. You are responsive. You don't perform peace. You embody it. You don't announce your worth. You exist in it. And the people who meet you now can feel it. Not because you tell them who you are, but because you remind them of who they are. You become a mirror, not a spotlight, not a brand, just a quiet reflection of what is possible when a soul stops running and begins returning. And that return isn't a single moment. It's a lifetime of devotion, a daily choice. To wake up, to stay open, to speak clearly, to walk with your heart turned toward the sun, even when the clouds are heavy. It is not the easy way, but it is the only way that leads to wholeness. And you begin to understand something most never do. You were never broken. You were just buried under survival patterns, under expectation, under inherited fear. But now that you've begun to unearth yourself, not polish, not fix, not upgrade, but unearth, you begin to live as someone who remembers what most forget. That your spirit is not here to fit in. It is here to awaken, to disrupt the sleep of conformity, to ignite the sacred, to walk through the world as evidence that truth is still alive. And that evidence is not in what you say. It's in how you show up, in how your eyes soften when you see someone hiding, in how you pause long enough to feel instead of rushing to perform, in how your energy no longer apologizes for existing. That's the new foundation. Not rules, not systems, not blueprints, but energy. The frequency of being someone whose life no longer argues with their soul. And from that frequency, you begin to create. You write, you build, you speak, you love, you live, and everything you touch begins to carry the imprint of your alignment. Not because it's perfect, but because it's true, and truth leaves fingerprints. Truth echoes. Truth calls home those who are ready. And that's the final shift. You stop trying to wake others up. You just become so fully awake that your presence becomes the invitation. You don't chase. You don't convince. You simply exist in truth and trust that those meant to rise with you will recognize your light not because you forced it into their eyes, but because it reminded them that they still have their own. This is what it means to rebuild a life that aligns with your spirit. Not a performance, not a strategy, not a self-help project, but a holy return to the you that never left, only waited beneath the noise, beneath the rows, beneath the years of forgetting for this moment. And now you remember. Now you rise. Now you rebuild, not into something new, but into something true. Because now you stand in the center of your life, not as a role, not as a title, but as a soul that has returned, no longer reaching, no longer hiding, no longer waiting for permission to be real. You've stopped building for recognition. You're building for resonance. And in doing so, you've become unshakable in the quietest way possible, not because the world applauded, but because you did. You looked at your reflection and said, I remember you. I remember the dreams before the duty, the fire before the fear, the voice before the silence, the rhythm before the rush. And now you don't just walk forward, you rise. You rise not with force, but with clarity. You rise not in defiance, but in devotion. Because the most radical thing you could ever do in a world that wants you distracted, diluted, and divided from yourself is to become whole again. And you rebuilt not just a life, but a legacy of alignment, a life that breathes your truth, moves with your essence, and carries the unmistakable imprint of your spirit uncompromised. Let the world spin. Let the noise roar. Let the old systems collapse. You will remain, not because you fought to stay standing, but because you finally stopped standing in your own way. And now you don't seek the light. You are the light. You carry the home. You walk as the answer you once searched for. So if they ask you, what happened? What changed? Smile and say, I stopped abandoning myself. I remembered who I am. And I rebuilt a life that finally fits my soul. And from this day forward, I live like I mean it. Fully, freely, unapologetically. This is the life your spirit was waiting for. And now you're living it. Welcome home.